Sounds good. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen actually real quick when I do that. Can everyone see that all right?
We cannot see your screen, Sarah.
No, not yet.
Okay. How's that? Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. I like being able to see all the faces. So if I don't go into presenter mode, I can still see all your faces. Welcome everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon for the Invent Seminar Series at OHSU. Our focus today is going to be on how to leverage market research and customer outreach to successfully launch your idea. This program is brought to you by the Oregon Clinical and Translational Research Institute at OHSU, as well as by the Surgical Innovation Program. My name is Sarah Biber, and I lead the Surgical Innovation Program and co-lead the Invent Seminar Series with my colleague Melissa Mudd, who is here today as well. Thanks, Melissa. And I'm really excited to introduce our panelists for today. We have an incredible group of folks with us to share their expertise in this arena with all of you and to answer questions. So I'll start off with Holly Rockweiler and her co-panelist Meyer over there as well. Holly, thank you so much for joining us. So Holly's going to tell you a bit more about our company in a little bit, but I'll just start off by saying that Holly is the CEO and co-founder of Medora, which is a women's health company dedicated to changing the treatment paradigm for vaginal dryness. She co-founded Medora 5 years ago as a spin-out of the Stanford Biodesign Fellowship. Prior to her time at Biodesign, she worked as a senior research scientist in the Cardiac Rhythm Management Division of Boston Scientific. Her work has led to more than 15 pending and issued patents, and we're really excited to have her with us today. Thank you, Holly. Okay, next I'm going to move on to Patty White, who is the CEO and co-founder of Hemix Health. Hemix Health develops life-changing diagnostics for low-resource settings. I'm sure you'll tell us a bit more about that platform in a little bit, Patty. She brings more than 25 years of experience in medical technology and has launched over 20 successful products, including many in emerging markets. Her experience spans cardiology, critical care, pain medicine, and diagnostics. She previously ran marketing for Hewlett Packard's cardiology division and HP's personal computer business. At HP, she also led the corporate product marketing organization that included market research and product definition consulting. Thank you so much for being with us, Patty. Okay, and then I'm going to move on to Fatih Khosrow Shahi. Fatih, thanks so much for being here with us.
What are we doing?
Swati is the CEO and founder of Seek Women's Healthcare. She has 20 years of experience in healthcare as a specialized management consultant focused on life sciences. As the commercial practice area lead for Campbell Alliance, she developed a group of 75 consultants to support the life science companies on the West Coast with launch and commercialization of biologics and cancer therapeutics. After enduring 3 years of infertility treatment, she realized that innovation in women's health hasn't kept pace with other therapeutic areas. She left her consulting group in 2015 to start Seek Women's Health and solve some of the problems she encountered in women's healthcare. Thanks so much for being with us, Swati. And lastly, I want to introduce Aaron Call. So Aaron has spent his entire career aligning emerging medical technologies to new markets. He started his career in the trenches of startups. I'm sure we'll hear more about that. And Eric experienced firsthand what it takes to successfully develop and commercialize products. He's worked to evaluate hundreds of med tech concepts, developing, investing, and incubating several of them towards becoming a standalone company. Aaron is the founding partner at Jaunt. Thank you so much for being with us, Aaron. Okay, so just a quick run of show for today, for our time together. Aaron is actually going to kick us off, giving about a 10-minute overview of market research and customer discovery kind of basics and strategy. And then we're going to launch into about 30 minutes of panel discussion, and then we'll have some time for Q&A directly with the audience. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to you, Aaron, and let you share your screen.
Great. All right. Thank you. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being a part of this. And I'd like to say thank you to OHSU for inviting me to speak about something I'm very passionate about.
Anyway, so
and
they're sending you.
I'm getting
so can everyone please go on mute who is not currently speaking? Thank you.
Thank you. So I started my career in the trenches of engineering, having graduated in biomedical engineering from Arizona State University. And during my college years, I spent time building exoskeleton robots for a startup company for stroke rehabilitation. After graduating college, I was fortunate enough to join a cardiovascular startup as employee number 4, designing percutaneous cardiovascular implants. It was there that I quickly realized that although I thought critically like an engineer, I wasn't truly an engineer. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. I found that the typical engineer was brilliant in taking scientific or physical elements and combining them in unique ways to build something new. That's the way they think, and we need that, right? But the entire time I worked with engineers doing these amazing things, my thinking was always, why are we building this? Who is going to buy this? And does anyone care? And so I found myself aligning to researching markets, writing market requirements, and getting into the head of the customer, and then translating that knowledge back to the engineers. In 2008, I joined my 4th startup company as employee number 7. It was there that I learned the ropes further about the calculated art of shaping products to align them to markets. I was fortunate enough to be part of a team that developed several products for the aesthetic space, launching 6 of them globally, reaching 90 million in revenue in 6 years, leading to a $600 million exit. And it was there that I experienced the phrase, it doesn't matter what we think, it matters what the market thinks. I continued to refine this type of thinking when I founded an incubator that attracted over 400 new medtech concepts that we systematically evaluated for investment and incubation. And now I find myself as the founding principal of a consulting firm that exclusively focuses on aligning the right products to the right markets at the right time. Because I know that through my own experience, that understanding your market is the most important thing for product success. So many of us, and I'm sure you can relate to this, many of us enter medical fields because we have a strong desire to help people, right? Medical professionals are constantly solving patients' problems by assessing symptoms and prescribing solutions. And med tech professionals are constantly developing better solutions to help doctors solve problems for their patients. There seems to be a recurring theme here of solving problems. And funny enough, that is where it all starts. Healthcare demands innovation, and this innovation saves lives and improves lives. That is something we're all focused on. However, innovation doesn't happen without funding, and funding doesn't happen without a real problem to be solved. So every innovation in the medtech field starts as an idea that might help someone. I'm guessing many of you have several ideas running through your mind right now, and you might think the world needs that idea. And I would ask you, does the world really need it? MedTech innovator and former CSO of Edwards Lifesciences, Stan Rowe, said it well when he said, most projects don't fail because the technology doesn't work. They fail because we didn't understand the customer requirements, didn't understand the distribution, didn't understand the competition, didn't understand the payers and referral patterns, all those extrinsic factors. If you don't have early stage marketing integrated into your teams, you're flying blind. And the fact of the matter is, in order to have a successful product that ends up improving lives, you have to have a market for the product to align to. And that market has to be lucrative. According to CB Insights, a top market intelligence aggregate, the #1 reason startups fail is no market need. The second reason is ran out of cash, followed by not having the right team, followed by getting beat by the competition. In fact, 16 of the top 20 reasons startups fail has to do with early stage marketing. Without a market, you won't get investors on board. Without a market, you won't get the right team on board. Without a market, nobody will buy the product. But you would be amazed at how many times we talk to passionate innovators thinking they have the next best thing for medicine, but who hasn't even Googled their idea yet. I had a brilliant PhD professor call me up one time saying, Aaron, this invention of mine is going to radically change the ER. And he commenced to describe to me what he had developed, the fact that he just won a $300,000 grant because his idea was so good, and told me he wanted my help developing it and selling it. Piece of cake, right? And I kid you not, I jumped on Google while he was talking on the phone and found 3 other products nearly identical, all of which had failed in the market, by the way. And I copied a link and sent it his way and said, how's your idea different from these? His reply was, well, crap, it isn't different at all. 2 years he'd spent on his product and it didn't have a market at all. And research would have told him that. Other industries other than medtech aren't as beholden to the innovation cycles medtech requires. For example, some industries such as SaaS or even your local diner, for instance, can take a launch then refine approach to market validation. Software companies might sell a beta version right away, and a diner might try a new recipe out for a week to see how it sells. But we typically don't have this option in medtech. So I would make the argument that market validation, market diligence is how I like to call it sometimes. They're said in simpler terms, doing your homework on your market is the #1 most contributing factor towards building a successful medtech company. So the question is, why doesn't everyone do it? Well, for one, cognitive bias. Cognitive bias leads you to believe in something without proof, purely because it is a product of your own imagination. I've worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs over the years, and nearly every one of them had cognitive bias in some shape or form. The successful ones were able to acknowledge their bias and sought out exhaustive, undeniable evidence as to why there was a market for their idea. This is what we refer to as market validation. It is the gathering of that evidence of your product's success long before it is even commercialized. So how do we recommend starting? Well, the first step is pretty simple. You start covering your bases with secondary research, digging into the information that is already out there. We live in a world of information. Diving into internet searches, peer review articles, databases, etc., starts to provide the landscape of your market. Look to answer questions like, is there truly a problem? How big is the problem? What products out there are solving similar problems? What are competitors offering? And one of my personal favorites, what solutions were abandoned that are similar to yours, and why did they fail? After you've exhausted secondary research, then go deeper. Odds are your secondary research will expose a lot more questions about your market and where you fit in. This is when you go directly to customers. Not your friends that will tell you why you're amazing, but to customers who are actually in need of hiring a product like yours to solve their problem. Talking directly with customers is called primary research. It is where you can gain insights to shape your value proposition, which is the reason why anyone cares to use your product over something else. Defining your competitive landscape and market landscape through secondary market research will not only lead you to understanding where your product could fit, but will start to help you define your market size. This is where you find your total available market, your serviceable addressable market, and immediately addressable market, as we like to call them, the TAM, SAM, and IAM. The answers you find in this type of research, both secondary and primary, in evaluating your market size, can be discouraging. And to be frank, I hope it is discouraging as you first keep going, because discouraging information is making you work harder. That information will start to change your idea to something better until eventually you not only find where your product can uniquely fit, but also where your product can dominate. To build a domain, you first have to figure out where the borders are. But this stuff is fun and rewarding. I've experienced that throughout my entire career. This figuring out what your customers' true problems are, knowing that you have a solution they have to have, and knowing what that ultimately could be worth, I think that's a lot of fun. Improving lives is invaluable, but unfortunately, investors can't work with that. And unless you are independently wealthy or run a large endowment fund, or you work in the government, you're going to need investors, and your investors need to know there's a market and that the market is big. If you perform market validation correctly, your chances of success grows exponentially. That's your job as an entrepreneur, to continue to be the expert, to be better than anyone else at knowing your market and having the objective evidence that you're right. So I encourage you to get out there, get out of your own bias, truly understand the market you seek to serve, and success will follow. So with that, Sarah, I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. And we will also be sending these slides around, Aaron's slides around afterward, so stay tuned for those. So I guess I want to leave a little bit of time right now for there any questions for Aaron on his presentation, any of the thought points he brought up. We also have time at the end for questions, but if anyone has any pressing questions right now, then feel free to jump in. You can unmute yourself.
Hello, Dave Farrell talking. One thing that Aaron said that really brings to mind some of the other resources that are available is the things like the NSF boot camp. I wondered what Aaron's thoughts are on how useful that format is for entrepreneurs who are trying to validate their market, just like he said.
Yeah, great. I'm not specifically familiar with their program. I haven't been through it. I've heard of it before. And a lot of times that and several others walk through this concept of getting out to customers early, as early as possible, right? And so, yeah, they're great. I mean, Steve Blank talks about this a lot, where he talks about get out to customers, talk to, I think his number is 100 as quickly as possible. And that starts to shape the problem that you're solving. And so, so I think they're great in methodically walking you through the process of talking to your customers and understanding your market as quickly as and as soon as possible.
Yeah, I've watched those Steve Blank ones. In fact, that's assigned reading if you get an SBIR grant, phase 1 from NSF. They want you to watch all of his videos, and they will pare it down to maybe 30 people as opposed to 100 as he suggests for that kind of a grant. But they have a larger program where they do want you to find 100 people who are stakeholders at some level. And it doesn't have to necessarily be customers. It could be people like insurance companies, will you reimburse? Things that you might not otherwise think of. So yeah, I completely agree with everything you've said, because I've gotten similar kinds of advice from that program as well.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point there too, in saying that I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. It'll come back to me. Sorry.
I was just going to interject. I'll let you know after I start I-Corps July 13th. So with my startup, and they do make you do 100 interviews, and we're lining up those ahead of time. But I agree with, and I think this might have been the point you were going to bring up, Erin, which is like customers in healthcare are tricky, right? There's no like direct customer. The stakeholder loop is huge, and so it's important to talk to lots of different folks along that sort of continuum.
Yeah, that's actually where I was heading. So it's your multi-sided market, right? And so yeah, the insurance, the payers, the providers, the 5 Ps as we like to say it, the physicians, and so yeah, talking to all of them because they're all a form of customer in medical markets. Thank you. That is where I was headed as I lost my train of thought. Thanks, Charlotte.
I see a few other folks have unmuted themselves. Does anyone else want to jump in with any questions or comments at this juncture? Okay. All right, we will proceed. So I wanted to focus my next set of questions towards Patty, Holly, and Fadi. So I'd love for you guys just to start off by kind of sharing a bit about kind of what your product is, your company, and like who your customers are, and how, yeah, as a starting point, that'd be great. Who wants to go first? Yeah.
I can go first. This is Holly. Okay. So our company is Medora, and we are treating vaginal dryness with a medical device. And it's a condition that's really only been treated by pharmaceuticals up to this point. And I thought that, Erin, your presentation was awesome. And thanks for bringing up the NSF too, because so our company was founded out of Stanford Biodesign, and that applies a design thinking approach and teaches you that process, which aligns with everything that you were saying. And I think it couldn't be more important. And that's how we understood how to start the company, even was understanding what unmet needs were. So the customer that we have is, like was described, is, I guess, like in all healthcare. Sorry, I have a coworker here. Our customer is the patient, but also the gynecologist. So our device, when it's launched, will be a prescription product. It's an FDA regulated product, and the gynecologist will prescribe it to a patient. So we started the company by understanding that there was a really strong unmet need for a non-hormonal solution to this problem. And it's interesting, you mentioned, Erin, like you have to kind of push the boundaries and keep challenging the biases, for yourself. And also I think what's really interesting in the healthcare innovation space is challenging the biases that many providers hold. Because when we first started this, we said, oh, vaginal dryness is a huge problem. It affects 15 million women in the United States alone. And doctors said, oh yeah, but it's easy. We just give them hormones. It's fine. And then when we started pulling that thread further, we realized, wait a minute, there's millions of women who refuse to take hormones, millions of women who can't take hormones, and lots of doctors who are uncomfortable prescribing hormones or won't prescribe hormones to certain patient populations. So ultimately, I think of it's sometimes hard, but a lot of fun to think about kind of multiple customers at once. And our product, we plan to launch it as a cash pay product, but we'll be looking into reimbursement. So ultimately insurance companies will also be our customer, so to speak, in the end.
Yeah, these are the cables.
Holly, can you share a little bit about kind of what,
thank you.
the early days were like for you guys as you were, initially starting to kind of vet and validate your idea and business model?
Yeah, so I mentioned we founded the company out of Stanford Biodesign, and what's really cool is that we had the opportunity to learn this design thinking process, really what you described, Erin. We got to learn it firsthand in a hands-on way with a lot of projects, and so we didn't start the company until after the school year had finished. And so the early days was actually before we became a company. We were out there talking to doctors and patients and understanding their unmet needs. And there were a lot of them. And then we had kind of competing projects that throughout the rest of the year, we kept doing diligence on with our market, with our customers, to understand which product or which project we should work on. And one thing that I like to always emphasize is that we did a lot of our diligence before we even had our solution in mind. It was a lot of diligence around just the unmet need. So I think, Erin, to your point, it kind of it's hard. I'm an engineer by training, so it's hard as an engineer. You see a problem, you want to solve it, but the discipline around focusing on an unmet need rather than a solution means you don't get too excited about features. You just kind of go out and understand how big the problem is. And that allowed us also to go really in depth with our interviews with women and understand what criteria they'd be looking for in a solution, which really then helped us brainstorm a much more out of the box solution. So, when I tell people we're doing a non-hormonal treatment for vaginal dryness, everyone assumes it's a lubricant because it's really kind of the world of solutions that exist today. But because of our interviews, we knew firsthand how much women hated those products and how poorly they worked. And that really led us to kind of focus our solution set on something that was totally different. And so early days was actually before we started the company. So we started the company with a lot of that research already on our, completed. But what I will say is that just the past 2 weeks, I've been doing more market validation because we've gotten some surprising results in one of our clinical trials. And so I've gone back and said, going back to gynecologists saying, okay, we found this data. What does this mean to you? Would you be interested in a product that did X, but not Y, Z, but not Y? And that's been really fascinating. And to your point, Erin, as well, it's really fun to do that and talk about, all the opportunity that's out there.
And how did you approach, so I know like the biodesign framework helps facilitate this to a large extent, but how did you approach clinicians that you wanted to speak with? What was your kind of strategy for that in the early days of getting the idea?
Yeah, it's easier said than done. We had a really unique opportunity when we were in the fellowship in that that's part of the program. You spend 1 month actually just immersed in the hospital at Stanford. And so you get this kind of unfettered access to lots of people, and people way above your pay grade have already agreed that it's okay for you to go kind of, ask these clinicians, buy them coffee and ask them lots of questions. So since leaving the program, it's harder, but I think it's kind of like all networking. Like once you find one, you can find more. And, at the end of every conversation I've been having the last 2 weeks, it's like, okay, do you know another gynecologist I could talk to who might be interested? So that's really helpful. I think it's also important, I think, Erin, you were hitting on this too, is to get outside of the friendlies, because, when I went out to do this recent research, it was easy for me to like call up the people on my scientific advisory board, but it's also really important to get to people who had never even heard of us before. So it's kind of like, okay, you don't want to only talk to your friends, like you said, Erin.
And like, how much did your trajectory of your idea shift based on that early feedback you got? Like, was there a big change from your initial idea to what you guys ended up moving ahead with?
Yeah, I think so. I think, like I said, it's the foundation of what we developed. So we wouldn't have done it without market research, period. But another kind of pivot I can talk about is that when we first came up with the idea, we wanted to do a wearable product. But as we started kind of developing that further, we realized there were a lot of engineering challenges with that. And for a product that's the first of its kind, we said, we just had to prove this thing works first before investing kind of all that engineering time and money. And so we went back to our customers, this time the patients, and said, is wearable nice to have or a need to have? And we really kind of dived deep, and what we found was that there was a nice separation in the market, that patients with a certain background said, no, it doesn't need to be wearable at all. And I can talk more about that, but they said, I just need something. I don't care how. One woman said, if it's the size of my car, I'll use it. I am desperate. I need something. And so that was really helpful to kind of validate that, you know, something we had previously thought that it had to be wearable really wasn't true. But for that second set of the market, they said, well, yeah, actually it would be better. So we kind of realized that there's this difference, and it makes sense with our market entry strategy. We want to start with that group that's desperate anyways, so we can have, you know, a less seamless customer experience if we have to.
Great, thank you. Vadi, I wonder if we can jump to you next, as given that your company is also in the women's health and gynecological space. And I know you did not launch out of a structured program like that, to hear a bit about your kind of early day. Well, first of all, I'd love to hear if you could just share with folks kind of what your product is, and who your customers are as a starting point. That'd be great.
Yeah, thank you. So a little bit about the company. So we have updated the vaginal speculum, both the reusable and the disposable speculum. And then we also have a number of products really to optimize the vaginal exam for patients and providers. So we have a disposable light that works with any speculum, metal, plastic, or ours. We have a vaginal sheath that works with any speculum to retract vaginal sidewalls. And then we have another product which is really designed for women who have a history of rape or trauma and want to take control over their exam. 2 of our products are on the market, and our 3rd product is actually getting launched in the COVID world in 2 weeks' time. And the remainder of the product line will be launched early next year. But, you know, because of my experience of working in healthcare, specifically with pharma and biotechnology companies, I had the experience of working across therapeutic areas. I'd interviewed, I'd been on site with cardiologists, dermatologists, or oncologists. And then in the midst of all of that, I got pregnant, and I went through 3 years of infertility treatment, which really came as a shock to me. And I was determined that I was going to have a baby. So my husband and I at that point lived in California. We went through I think some of the best clinics in California. We traveled to New York and actually went to the same clinic that Celine Dion went, and that didn't work out. And long story short, actually, Dr. Hesla in Oregon got me pregnant. And, but after I had my 2 daughters, you know, I always think of something really sad, maybe you know, my 2 daughters obviously made things perfect for us. But, you know, as I reflected, I thought, what was it about that whole thing that was terrible? And to me, honestly, the vaginal speculum stood out. So I was actually kind of N of 1 patient. I became very passionate about it, but my husband wasn't willing to let me go in that direction until we'd done our diligence. And as a management consultant, I kind of went through the process that Erin had laid out. Trying to take my emotions out of it, which was, is the market big enough? Is there an unmet need? What we realized actually for us is that it's a multi-tiered customer base. So you kind of think of OBGYNs, there's obstetricians, there are gynecologists. You think of women as kind of a broad umbrella of women, but there's peri and postmenopausal women. There are women who are going for their first exam, or adolescents. There are women who are cancer survivors, birthing women, women with an elevated BMI, and nobody really had segmented the women the way we had to look at them and make sure that our products address the needs of each of those segments. We have done multiple rounds of market research during our R&D process. Every prototype that we developed, once it was at a stage where we knew mechanically we could develop it, before investing the money, we did a round of market research. And I agree with Holly so much here, which is, don't go with people who always agree with you. Try to go to people who don't agree with you, because those are the ones who really add the most value to your research. And I think raise sometimes valid, sometimes not very valid objections, but I think it's really important to get feedback, not only from people to see your vision, who understand the unmet need, but from people who really who are not very friendly. And I thought that was really important for us. There's actually a website where you can get do a blinded survey with women. We did that. We've gotten over 4,000 responses of our product line at various stages from women and our business models. And I think for me, the value of it was, we recently closed on our first round of financing last year. And if I hadn't done that research, I really don't think I could have closed on it. And then recently we finalized an agreement with a company called Lupin Pharmaceuticals, who will be our co-promote partner in the US. And I do believe they were very data driven. And if we had not done our homework and our research, there's absolutely no way we could have reached an agreement with them and closed on it kind of in this COVID world. So I'm a big believer in data and research and listening to the customer. With one caveat, actually, and sometimes I believe if you have a product that's highly innovative, you kind of have to really also believe in that and push it forward, even though customers may not agree to it at the start. We had actually one of our products, which I mentioned to you, was for women who have a history of rape or trauma. I just thought it was too complicated. I didn't like it, but my head of design loved that product, and I listened to her. And when we got some feedback, and I was like, yeah, this has a valid market, so let's push it forward. So I do think there are some instances you need to trust your gut with a product that's highly innovative, where the market may not be able to visualize it unless you or understand it, unless you have a product that you can actually put in front of them that they could touch, feel. And that product actually has turned into be one of our best sellers.
Yeah, I'll have to follow up with you for a link to that site where you can do those blinded surveys. That sounds like it could be really valuable for other folks as well. So what did those early days look like for you? Like, you got your initial idea, and who are some of the most, like, as far as the initial outreach you did that was valuable, who were you reaching out to, and how are you finding those folks?
I actually, I mean, when I remember that initially, so my sister-in-law's sister-in-law is a nurse midwife, and she was the first person I reached out to, and I thought about updating the speculum, and she thought it was a really good idea, so that motivated me. Then I went to my own OBGYN and got his feedback. Then I actually went to Dr. Hessler, and we got feedback from him. And similar to what Holly said, it's really a matter of networking and asking different providers to give you feedback. We were very small at that point. There was only 2 of us. And so we had a lot to do, and it was extremely fun, but that's how we actually started getting feedback from people. And I think for us, it was a multi-tier. So we got feedback from women who are really the end consumer, but we also got feedback from providers, and we took that provider group and segmented it. And then we got feedback from all different segments on the product line. But referral from one provider to another provider really was the way we did it.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. So Holly, Patty, I'd love to move over to you to hear a bit about the Hem-X story. I guess you could tell the story for a number of different products you've launched, but if you want to focus on Hem-X, that would
Sure. Thanks. I'm happy to. Yeah, I really loved what everybody has said so far, and really want to emphasize some of those great lessons. I think we've all learned the same lessons over and over again. And so Hem-X Health. So we're focused on a diagnostic platform. So it's really a device, an instrument, which has a small reader, and then cartridges that are used for each test. So, we're really focused on just having this be a platform that can do a number of tests, but we just recently launched it with sickle cell disease and malaria. So, we did a ton of research, and it's always the kind of research that involves getting on a plane usually and going somewhere and, getting into probably some uncomfortable situations sometimes. But it was really a great experience for us. We had done other products in the developing world, so it's not our first time there. But, you do really need to go deep with this. And, our users with this technology, it kind of went lower down in the pyramid than other things that we've done. So for this technology, our users could be, the village healthcare workers all the way to, a specialist physician in an African country. And it's also the lab workers, the people that take the tests in most of these places. And, the patients, these people deliver care to over 3 billion people in the world. So these are very large markets with lots of people and not very many providers. And, part of the thing that inspired us was that, when we go out there, you could just see that, the equipment they had was terrible. They had old stuff that was left over from the US that, didn't even work. And even if they were given something brand new, it wouldn't be usable. So we really had an opportunity to, really create a whole fresh look at how would we really serve these needs. And there's so much we learned by just being out there. We were our markets are in, India, countries in Africa, South America, Southeast Asia. In addition to those users I mentioned, you also have to worry about the public health agencies, the NGOs, the administrators. I mean, who actually pays for all of this? Because, if you go to the developing world, you see needs everywhere. And, one of the things that from Stanford Biodesign, they said, their frustrations were students always come up with ideas for needs, but, is it important enough that someone's going to pay for it? And so that we did a lot of research around those areas. And, Erin mentioned starting with secondary research. I mean, some of the challenge we've found is that a lot of the secondary research that's out there is just not even accurate. Except it's reported by governments who don't always want to say how many people are really dying of a disease. It can be very, with the internet now, it seems like people just rewrite what some other person has written. So you see kind of the same myths going through the research. And it's really good for maybe looking at the competitive space and who's out there. And like, if I take one example, if I think like malaria, so many people want to do a malaria device or diagnostic because, there's a billion tests every year. The current malaria tests are not that good. I mean, it's really a very kind of backwards market, but so many come out and they almost all fail. I mean, it's just a huge landscape of carcasses that are left behind. And so we really had to go deep to make sure that we weren't going to be the same, where there's always a chance that we would end up like one of those. Yeah. So we did a lot of, we started by doing research with people who are malaria experts because it's such a big market. There are a lot of them around. And we did interviews. We found one that had just left a job. And so we hired him and said, can you set up all the interviews with all the others? Because you're in this very cliquish kind of space. He set that all up and we were able to go out and get a lot of interviews very efficiently. He introduced us and then we went out with a questionnaire. And then when we got to getting out into the market to really researching our concept further, we had licensed some technology, or we had the opportunity to license some technology from a university. So it's something to start with, but we need to figure out how we were going to make it into a product. So then we went to India first. We started doing some interviews, and we saw pretty early on that, it's really hard for a foreign person who doesn't know the local language, to have to do these interviews in English. And I'm like a huge believer that the founder, has to be out there doing these interviews because there's a lot that you get just from intuition and from seeing how people answer things, not just what they say. So it was really hard for us to kind of, we did a fair amount of them, but then we really had to let go a little bit and hire basically an engineering firm that we could train to go out and do research in local language across the whole country. And, they did about 40 interviews, but, they could go and really hear the bad things. The people wouldn't tell us as a foreigner coming there. They're not going to say a lot of bad things about your ideas. They could get all that information and we could incorporate that into our design. So, I would just say for every product I've had that I've worked on, I think this primary research is the critical phase, and learning how to do it, learning how to ask, why do they feel this way? Like going to the next level, 2 or 3 levels down when you're talking with somebody, that's what's really, there's a real skill involved in doing that. And the more you do it, the better you're going to get. And, I always believe the engineers should be out doing it too, because, they'll get insight over what somebody really, really needs. And also just going out and seeing the places. I mean, when we went to see these labs, we realized that we better make this very small, and we also realized that every time we asked them about a different disease, they had to go pull out a different instrument, and it was just like ridiculous. Oh yeah, that's down here in this Tupperware thing. This is where I have this device. And we realized the idea of a platform that could do a lot of tests was going to really save them. And we also realized that, they don't have power. The power is totally inconsistent, power going out all the time. And we got the idea about how to design a new power system. So those were the kind of things we found. And it's a really fun experience. I think it's one of the best parts about doing a new idea is really go talking to the people, and it will change your mind about what you think. Though you definitely will learn things.
So you guys really started with defining the problem space you wanted to focus on, and then after you kind of vetted that thoroughly and better understood what sort of solution you might need, you went out and looked for a technology to license from a university that would kind of be a good starting point for that. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, we started with a very big problem space, which was, we were looking for things that would help underserved markets. And we looked at over 100 different technologies. So then we kind of narrowed it down to 2 that were interesting technologies that we thought, really could help meet the needs that we knew. And then we went deeper. So we kind of did a tiered approach. Really, we started with 2 because we thought we might throw out 1. We didn't know what the answer was going to be. We weren't really that wedded to it. We hadn't licensed it. We just went out to see, is it worth it? Is it worth the next 4 years of our life? That's what it ends up being. It has to be pretty good to do that.
Yeah, well, you guys, it sounds like you guys chose wisely. So I guess I'm curious here from everyone, like, at what point did you realize, like, okay, this thing has legs? This is something, what was the point at which that became clear?
Well, I think what we realized when we're out there and saw the people is that, what they have is really doesn't solve their problems. We heard that it was a real weak spot from them. In the case of malaria, people would talk about how during the epidemics, because it always comes and goes with the rainy season, that, these people that work at labs, like, they wouldn't be able to go home because it would take them 45 minutes per patient to do a test. And we saw that the technology we had would do a 1-minute test. And, of course, we don't know with medical, you never know how accurate it's going to be until you're done. I mean, I've gotten surprised by that a few times in my career where, until you did the clinical trials, you found out it didn't actually work, especially with, products that are more technical. But we really had we saw the vision that if you could do this in a minute, it was going to be very different. And you, of course, had to be accurate and you had to be cheap, because that's the other thing the market really told us. So once we kind of saw that, this really had that potential, and we knew how to do low-cost products. That's kind of what we brought, that, we would take the gamble, but you have to go into this thinking that, it's always a gamble. Otherwise, you shouldn't be an entrepreneur. That you might fail, and you got to be willing to admit failure, or you'll lose your whole life, doing these things. So I think it's if you really listen to the people that tell you the bad news, like Holly and Friday talked about, that you need to listen to that and not be too biased about it.
Wonderful. So I guess as a question, opening this up to all the panelists at this point, I'm curious to hear a little bit about what questions you recommend entrepreneurs ask themselves as they begin to launch into this process. What kinds of questions should folks be asking themselves? Do you want to make a 4-year commitment, I guess, as you're saying, Patty, was one of those.
Hopefully it's not 4 years for everybody. Well, I think the key thing you've got to go to find out is, if you're going to do research, you've got an idea, but you've got to really find out, is it just a want? Is it a nice to have? Or is it really solved an important problem? It's so easy to be in love with the technology, but then you find out the problem's not important enough. And, I've learned from that, several times in my career, because you think it's really cool and people tell you it's cool, but then you figure out, but not a real priority. Mm-hmm. So that's one of them. And the other one I would just say is follow the money. There has to be money in it. Unfortunately, medicine is also about money. And, you have to be really careful in the medical area to make sure you can do something that is a sustainable business or that somebody will pay for, because that's also very difficult.
I'll chime in and add to that, if that's okay. One of the questions I like to ask myself, and that we bring up constantly with our clients, is the question of what has to be true, right? And so when you ask yourself what has to be true, then you're starting to seek out research and information and data that says, okay, number one is I have to build this for $5 and I have to sell it for $80. Is that possible? What has to be true? Well, no, I have to sell it for 10,000. Is there a market to sell it for 10,000? I have to sell 5,000 units of these a year. So the numbers and the information really start to follow that. If you're asking yourself what has to be true for this product, this idea, this market to be lucrative and successful enough.
It's a really good one. Yeah.
I'd add, am I passionate about this? And I think, probably that's the obvious question, and you would have figured that out early on. But just, again, as being an engineer, when I was in the program at Stanford, like I said, we had a lot of projects we were working on simultaneously. And we also had one in men's sexual health. And not that that's not an important space, but I realized that as we were kind of doing our interviews with patients, that it was a lot harder to connect with the men with this condition. And there was, there's a lot more to it than that. But basically, I realized, like, I just, this isn't fitting with my kind of personal passion. And so I felt like there was a lot more contribution I could make in women's health. And that, I think, to Patty's point, is like, are you ready to dedicate your life to this? It has to be more than just something fun to do for 8 hours a day, because it's a lot more than that.
Yeah. Patty, anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I agree with what everybody says. I mean, the one that resonates with me the most is actually you really have to be passionate about it, because it is more than a 9-to-5 job, and you're the one carrying the burden. And it's extremely rewarding too. But I do feel it definitely expands beyond a 9-to-5 job. And I think you carry your family with you too, as well. It's not only you doing it; your family's on that journey too. So I think before doing it, make sure your spouse is on board. And you can have a startup is not an easy thing. I think I had a completely different idea of what it would turn out to be like when I first started versus where I am right now 5 years later. So I definitely think it's a commitment that you have to be ready to do. And I have to say, I sometimes get jealous of my sister who works for a nice company, goes on her holidays, does all her stuff, and it's like, what are you doing for the summer? Oh, I'm working. We have a launch. Can I come and visit you? No, you can't come and visit me. We have a launch. So I think the company dominates your life, and you have to be willing to make personal sacrifices like that,
All right. So as you're going out and doing all this outreach to customers and sharing your idea and trying to better understand the problem space, how did you walk the line between information gathering and then also worrying, oh my goodness, is someone gonna take my idea and run with it? Do you guys have any thoughts to share on how you navigated that piece of it?
I could start with, again, we had a kind of unique situation starting at Stanford. So we were kind of all protected. No matter what anyone invented while we were there, Stanford owned everything. So it kind of didn't really matter. But now after the fact, that we have some of our foundational patents. I guess the first thing I'll say is that it's very easy to put a provisional in, and it can be relatively cheap. You can do it yourself, although I wouldn't always recommend that. So once you have kind of your baseline protection, I think the risk of someone stealing your idea, maybe this is naive, is pretty low, given all the blood, sweat, and tears it takes to make something happen. I think, there's certain things that we decided, okay, this is stuff that's completely highly confidential, but kind of short of that, we're comfortable sharing a lot about what we do, because that, I think you get out what you put in. So if we're being more authentic with the people we're talking to, like physicians, for example, and are really clear about what our device does and how it works and the data we do have, we tend to get a lot more engagement in the conversations with them.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's not, as long as you have your provisionals, you really have the core IP in place. I mean, it's more, you're going to get more by talking about it with people than you're going to risk. And, I think the other thing is most no one wants to go down as deep as you could go down. I mean, it's just not going to be interesting to them. So, you're really doing research at a different level when you're out talking to people. And, it's like I've seen people it's kind of the mark of someone who hasn't had a lot of entrepreneur experience to be like, you have to sign an NDA before I'll talk to you. And I have to go, being overly concerned about that is because like investors never really do that. And, you got to be open and have enough confidence in what you're doing and what you're putting together. And the other thing I would say is it's really great to document what you're getting out of these interviews and have that, because that's going to be great to use later. In other words, you're amassing a huge amount of information, out of these discussions. And, that's why it's good to have these and be open to getting all this input, because that's bankable in a way in the future when you're trying to raise money, or so if you can go back to these people. I mean, we went back to even the people we interviewed first when we launched the product, and they're just like, wow, I was waiting for this. 4 years ago, you talked to me and I remember that. It's really cool. So yeah, I think just getting out there and talking to people is way more important than any risk.
Yeah, I'll chime in here. I agree full-heartedly, Patty. And I think number one, I tell people this a lot. Stop worrying about people stealing your idea. To Holly's point, it takes so much work to get there to make it successful. It's not just about the idea; it's about the 90% of the work that it takes to get there. So, number one, yeah, don't worry about it. Number two is a lot of times in the interviews and doing your initial research about the market and the need and the unmet needs and the problem has nothing to do with your idea. And so keep that in mind as you're starting to do that initial research and market discovery work. Is you don't have to bring up your solution. You don't have to bring up your idea. You're talking about the problems that they have, how they solve them today, how they go about making a decision on solving products, and you're doing so much research that has nothing to do with the nuts and bolts of your IP, anyways. And so start there, and then as you get further down the road, then you're getting into testing your value proposition and your product more specifically. But there's so much research to do without even talking about your idea in the beginning.
Yeah, I would add to that, to what Erin said, is that you're there to find out about them. You're not really there to fill their head with everything you know. And I think sometimes I've seen people forget that in doing market research. You're really there to listen. I mean, we've also learned the most by sometimes asking these questions, like, we have spent part of the interview just talking about, what do you like most about your job? Very broad like that. What do you not like about it? What do you really wish could be different? It doesn't have anything to do with this device, but we've actually gotten some of the best information from those kind of questions. I mean, that's how we kind of learned that, really people they always have a problem with power, but we always found by talking to them that they could always charge a cell phone somewhere. So, we figured out we needed to make our device so it could work on cell phone chargers. And we wouldn't have known that if we hadn't been asking them, these general questions. And that really helps.
That's great. Yeah. This is all just great advice. Thank you guys so much. As far as when you were going about evaluating your potential customers, how did you ensure that you're reaching out to you were getting input from the full diversity of customers? And then also from there, how did you hone in on kind of who was going to be your first group of customers that you targeted?
I can start. I don't think I have a good answer. I think that I really appreciate, Fatih, what you were saying about how you were segmenting the kind of patient population in women's health, because you're right, people aren't doing that. And it's amazing. It's like, we've kind of taken an approach of like, the gap is so large, like we have to start just putting technology out there and then can refine it for, kind of the differences among the market. So, for us broadly, I mentioned, we split up our market into kind of first adopters and later adopters. And that was really a broad brush that we took to that. But that came out to us very clearly from our early interviews, again, is like talking to physicians, and they said, oh, hormones solve this problem. And then we said, well, what about the women who can't use hormones? For instance, if they have breast cancer or are, recently had a stroke or something. And they said, oh, yeah, we don't really have anything for them. It's like, okay, well, that's millions of women. So that's a pretty large group. So that was obvious to us in terms of how to segment. And then, we followed up and did research with those specific groups. But when I think about, obviously the context of what's going on in our world right now, it's like, I don't think we've done a good enough job of, diversity in terms of background and socioeconomic class and things like that. And I think that is really important and something we should be doing more of.
Yeah, I agree with Holly. The way I think about it is that, at least when we started our work, is when you look at women's healthcare providers, you can put them under one bucket, which is women healthcare providers. But it's like peeling an onion. There are so many layers below it. You break that up. You have OBGYNs, nurse midwife, reproductive endocrinologists, gynecologist, oncologist, and then it's all homework, and it depends on where, the size of the market, the extent of unmet needs. For us specifically, it boiled down to which one of these segments uses the speculum more than any other segment. And that narrowed us down to the OBGYNs. Then when we looked at the OBGYNs, there are female providers, there are male providers. We separated them by age group, kind of the younger OBGYNs versus kind of those that are more experienced, and then those that are retiring. And then we looked at it and thought, well, is there going to be a difference between their adoption patterns? And that actually, I have to say, really surprised me. My initial thought process was that the providers who are older are going to be our late adopters, and the younger providers are going to be our faster adopters. And we realized for our work that was totally not correct. There were a lot of older providers who were extremely frustrated with the speculum. They actually championed us through some pretty large institutions, and without them, we couldn't have gotten in. So that was kind of one of the values of doing the research. But I kind of see it as your customer base is like peeling an onion. You really have to do your homework in terms of understanding who the customer is. And for us, it's two segments. It's the provider who uses the speculum, but then on the other side of it is the patient. And how you tailor your messages for the end consumer in the context of the provider who is providing that care to the end consumer can get very complicated. And I think it's something you just have to do. And as you peel the layers of the onion, you learn more.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that that probably, you know, that segmentation of the market, like what Fadia is talking about, is probably one of the most important things you can do through your market research before your launch, because by definition, if you're a startup, you can't go everywhere. So if you can figure out, you know, who's that group that's going to be the first adopters, you know, for us, we knew that, you know, our fastest place to go would be the private labs. You know, these small private labs that are in India where they could make money off of our device once they had it. Because I think everybody always thought, well, why aren't you selling this to WHO or to, you know, the governments or Gates Foundation or groups like that? But those groups are very slow to really adopt new technology. And, you know, we really found out through our research is that, you know, where is the need really great, and they have the ability to make a decision and get the value out of the product right away. So, you know, really, I always like Jeff Moore's book, The Crossing the Chasm stuff. I mean, that's good for every entrepreneur to know that, even though it's really old now. It's still really good to think about, you know, who are the early adopters that are the first ones to go after this new technology, and, you know, who can adopt it and start giving you revenue quickly, because that's what you need as a startup to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, some other questions I'd love to touch on, but I want to open up this up to the audience now to hear some questions from folks. If anybody wants to jump in, feel free. If not, we'll keep going with other questions. I don't. Okay, I'm going to ask another question then. So Fadia, you touched on this a bit, but I'd love to hear more about this both from you and from the other panelists. So when it comes to raising money, right? You've done all of this either through, you know, grants or through going to investors, et cetera. How important was it to have done this market research, and how did you package that? Like, what were investors or funding agencies most interested in hearing about? What was most compelling for them in terms of showing that you had validated your market?
Well, it was really interesting because when I first started this, I was so attached to my baby. So I had slides talking about the technology. This is what it does. This is how it works. And I kind of realized investors just want one slide, maybe two slides on what the product is. That's for the initial, when they're first looking at the initial document. The next part is like, okay, if this is your exciting, cool technology, what's the unmet need? And you can only explain that unmet need in the context of having some data to back it up. If you don't have that, I think, you know, as sexy as your technology is, the whole document falls apart. So I think the research was extremely crucial for us. And we kind of packaged it in different ways. And I always say, when you're doing your research, don't think you have to go and get a huge pen to do it. But I think if you're going to investors, you need to make sure that the feedback you're getting is from a reputable source. So if it's And I think that's going to be extremely critical. It shows that as an entrepreneur, you are able to establish that credibility with a leading provider at a leading institution. I think it's really important to do that. So you don't necessarily have to go and get a huge N, but it's important if you have 10 interviews, you make sure those are 10 quality interviews with 10 quality providers that are giving you that feedback.
That's great.
The thing I would add is that I think it's obviously important to articulate your research, but two things I want to say. One is we learned early on, similar to I think what Fatih is saying, is like they don't want a book report. They don't want to be inundated with here's the 75 interviews I did and here's a quote from each of them. Obviously, like nobody wants that, but it'll be very clear with their questioning, like if you've done your research. And so I think they'll try to poke, like I think like Patty was saying, like when you're talking about technology, like you could go deep, you could go hours on this topic and that'll come across if you've done the research to back it up. But making sure you have a way of advertising it, waving a flag that you've done it, like I think Fatih said something about like, well, we did a survey of 2,000 women. It's like alone, that sounds really impressive. And then the other thing I want to say too is that like, well, the investors are going to go out and they're going to validate what you said by calling their friends who are gynecologists in our space, for example. And so it's really important that you have done enough research to understand, okay, have I talked to a wide enough swath of gynecologists to know what types of responses they're going to get? Because the worst thing is if you walk in and say, this is a huge problem, 10 out of 10 gynecologists agree, then they call, their buddy and they're like, that's a dumb idea, I don't have any interest. Of course, that could happen always, but it's important to kind of prepare for that process by making sure you've done enough research.
That's great. So Erin, I'm curious, as you coach early stage entrepreneurs through this process, what are some of the questions you let them know they should be prepared for as they do this early stage fundraising?
Yeah, so I think it's all about telling a story, right? And so if you think about it from a story perspective, and nearly all the work we do works its way into our clients' investor decks or pitch decks in some way, shape, or form. And so if you as the entrepreneur are thinking about it as, what's the story I need to tell to get this investor, this individual, this group on board to believe what I believe? And if you approach it that way, then you're starting to think, okay, I want to say 9 out of 10 gynecologists believe this. And how can I state that? And how can I go get that information and data to through reputable sources to be able to state that in a credible fashion? So I think that's how you can start to shape the information that you need to go get to then put into there to be able to tell your story and back up your story. At the end of the day, it's all about convincing them that you're right and having the evidence to back that up. And you might have a crazy idea, but if you can get other people on board and join your cause, then your crazy idea just might work.
Yeah.
I think another thing I just learned actually during our interviews was physicians are actually really open to talking to people and learning about, they enjoy learning about new things. So I really don't think I've had that many pushbacks when I've gone for interviews. I feel they have a pretty routine structure today. So when you sit with them to talk to them, they actually, I feel they embrace talking about, with smaller companies, especially startups versus big pharma companies, they do, I think there's a big handful of providers that enjoy interaction with entrepreneurs. So, yeah.
Patty, any additional thoughts on that?
I think this one comment on what Erin said is that you are telling a story, and so when you're talking with investors, and the more you've been out in the field, the more you can make it a really rich story. When they ask a question, you can give them an example, and it really does show if you've been out there. And they can kind of there's no way they're going to have the time to go interview people all over the world. So it comes back to, can you use your primary research to help give you credibility? And so they feel like, no matter what question they ask, you can come back with, an approach that makes sense, and it clearly comes from a knowledgeable perspective. And the other thing I found in due diligence is they're going to want to talk to maybe some of the people you talked with. I mean, they may not have the contacts to go out there. So, you should be kind of figuring out who are the people, either usually maybe a couple KOLs, that are out there, or just maybe somebody that's, has a great way of articulating their situation. That's great to have them be a reference for when your investors want to do due diligence later.
So in addition to, there's obviously incredible value in reaching out to customers, understanding the problem spaces better. And in addition to that, are there other tools that you would point folks to? I know, Fatih, you talked about that survey tool. Are there what other types? I mean, Googling, obviously, that's been touched on as well, can be super valuable, as Erin noted. What other tools do you direct people towards, in addition to that kind of direct outreach to folks to start to get a sense of the market? And once again, I want to encourage folks in the audience to jump in at any point with their questions as well.
I'll chime in on that one, Sarah. So we use a lot of different tools. I think number one is, if you're associated with a university, check with your local tech transfer office or your university library. A lot of times they'll have access to databases that you can get market research reports from and start to get some of that information on a secondary research basis. Then, interview tools. There's a little unknown tool that we use probably weekly, to be honest, called Sermo, S-E-R-M-O. And so through Sermo, you can actually run surveys, and we've run pretty large quant surveys, quantitative surveys through that, and we can drill down into physicians. Like we might get specifically into a dermatologist that treats this type of acne or whatever it might be, and get very specific and ask some quantitative questions that way. And then I'd say beyond that, networking is a great friend. Obviously, LinkedIn. Hopefully everybody knows that one. Just reaching out to people that can help you there. And then there's also, simpler kind of low cost databases that you can subscribe to start to get information and start to reach out to other people. And then the last thing I'll mention is survey tools for patients. There's a ton of those that you can do pretty inexpensively and start to reach out to the broad consumer audience, if you will, too. So some that we use on a regular basis.
That's fantastic.
I'd add also that societies or patient advocacy groups tend to have, really big followings on, social media. So that's sometimes a way to access. I think, it's a careful line you have to walk, because sometimes it's a money-making scheme for them. They would want you to pay to access their members. But it depends on kind of what the unmet need is. And, like a friend of mine is working in psoriasis, and he's gotten a lot of, attention thanks to the Psoriasis Foundation, like Pinterest account or something. And so it's like, sometimes maybe surprising, but, the patients are on the internet, obviously, we all are. And that's, I think, an interesting area. And I'll just mention, something we did before we really had any money was we did a survey on Craigslist. So there's like a volunteer section of Craigslist, and we posted it in various kind of large cities across the United States, and just tried to be honest and said, we are a very small group of people. We're trying to do research around vaginal dryness, and we had more than 2,000 women respond to that. And so I think it's really exciting, to the point we're talking about being able to, sound credible and have real research that's validated, validating what you think. And I think is also a nice, to tell investors how scrappy we are that we did that on Craigslist. So I'm not familiar with Sermo, but I'm definitely going to check it out.
I think that's pretty great. I think that's pretty great to use Craigslist. I've never tried that, Holly. I use it for a lot of other things. But, the other idea that we've used a lot is if you back when you can actually, or when you can actually travel again, is to go to one of these medical meetings, because, when you have people there, at a, let's say a Society of Hematology meeting, these, they're not in their office, they're free to walk around, and you can even organize a happy hour, get a bunch of people there. I mean, it's a great way to actually have them introduce you to their other colleagues. And so we really use those venues as a great place to do market research, to really be structured. If you have a small booth, you say to people, these are the questions we're trying to answer. So when somebody walks in, don't just, chit chat. I mean, ask them these questions, or see if they'll participate in the survey or do something like that, because, it's all free. They're all there walking around, and you just have to be, go up there and greet them or get them as they come in your booth.
It's a great idea too. All right, any audience members want to jump in with additional questions? I want to ask a question about COVID. So COVID-19, and talking about scrappiness too, because I know some of you have been very scrappy in adapting to the changing market landscape as a result of COVID-19. So big shifts are happening. How have you been pivoting in response to COVID-19 in terms of your company, and what strategies have you used to better understand how markets are shifting in the arenas you care about for your companies in response to that?
I can talk about it because it's really causing me a lot of headache. So we are launching our lead product in 2 weeks' time, and we went back and forth on whether we should launch it or not. Yeah. And for the last 6 months, we've been actually talking to providers at some leading academic hospitals. We've made a lot of in-person meetings. And with a medical device, people like to hold the device in their hand. They like to see it. They like to feel it. It's very different than if you want to do virtual detailing, talking about a pill or a biologic where you can just share data. So for us specifically, we've shifted from having in-person meetings into virtual meetings. And then to support that virtual meeting, because we can't show the device to the company, we've made videos. So we have an in vivo video of the product in use in a patient. We've done a strength testing video comparing our device to metal speculum and how far it would take for the speculum to break. We've done a provider video. Anyway, lots of videos where we actually don't speak as much. We briefly do a demo of the product, and we shift to the videos, and they can actually see the product in use. Then we send the product to the customer. They can try it, and then they can ship it back to us. But it's definitely been a big hassle factor, and I would say more expensive than actually doing the in-person detailing. But that's what we've had to do.
Yeah. You have a whole product in this arena now, Patty. Correct.
Well, we are. I mean, one of the things we decided to do, of course, was to work on a COVID diagnostic, and we are working on that. But that's going to still take a few more months to get to where we even will know whether how it will perform. But yeah, I think for us, we really had to rethink so many things. We had our clinical studies stopped in a lot of places because of they suspended research. We've done the same thing. We've done a lot we were about to launch, so we kind of pulled it back for a little bit, partly because there's no room with journalists and all this stuff. There was no room in the air for anything but COVID. I mean, there are journalists who told us, I'm doing nothing but talking about COVID. And we ended up the reason we did our launch last week was because it was World Sickle Cell Day. It only happens once a year. We decided, okay, we're going for it. We're going to go in right then, and because, we wanted to get it out there, and we knew at least the people that really cared about sickle cell, there are lots of webinars and those things going on. But I mean, it's been, it's challenging because, we know we can't even predict what the US is doing. Think about now, we're trying to predict probably 10 other countries that we have major things going on in, and they, they're trying to deal with COVID. And, we've had to do the same thing. We trained a sales force of 85 people on Zoom. Like in India, we did 6 hours of training. We did a bunch of videos because it's a lot easier for them to see little videos than to try to demonstrate a product on Zoom. We decided it was really a disaster and not even to try to do that. And we're now shipping our product to customers and training them, with those videos and doing a Zoom call and saying, okay, take it out of the box, start using it. I mean, we're just improvising, because otherwise you're just, as a startup, you can't stop unless you want to stop spending money. Say, we're just going to go to zero. You have to make progress. I mean, that's what we say to the team. It's like every day, people making progress. We took all of our non-hands-on people out of our office. We have just lab people and hardware people there spread out. All the rest of us work from home. We reorganized the whole office. I mean, it's been a lot of challenges. But we're doing it. We're making progress.
Patty, I'm going to call you after this.
We share the same challenges. It's hard.
I was going to say, for us, we're clinical stage, so we're further from launch, thankfully. I guess we're in a pretty decent spot, and our device is used at home. And so we have a clinical trial going on right now. And so the challenge of clinical research stopping meant that our patients could still use the device, but they just couldn't come into the clinic for their data collection. So we've had to pivot that. There's some in-person speculum exams that occur in our trial that we had to give up on, but Fatty, I need to call you and learn more if they can do that at home. But the surveys that we're collecting, we can still do those at home, so we're doing that. I think for us, when I think about kind of going out to talk to investors about this period, because I think it's important, as the other panelists have mentioned, to show how you've pivoted and you can react, because as a startup you have to. I think about what's the opportunity here? Well, for us, it's to talk about the importance of home health care, and that's been a message we've been saying for a long time, as many other telehealth startups have been, and I think that ears will be open a lot wider to hearing this type of solution. And I also think to the future about we want to be acquired by a large medical device company, and so a pitch to them now is you need to diversify your assets, because if you only have in-hospital use products, you're open to a lot of risk if that hospital has to close. And wouldn't it be great if you could have a device that could just be shipped to a patient and she can use it at home? So I try to think positively, because there's a lot of challenges obviously that we're facing too. And it's obvious, but the investment climate is very different right now. And that's, obviously changed our timelines for things, and times that we've planned to raise need to change. And so that's been definitely hard. But, I think you got to keep going. I like what you said, Patty. I wrote down your quote, every day making progress, or every day people making progress. I'm going to put that on my desk.
Do any audience members want to jump in with a question, either in the chat or by speaking up? So I do want to mention that we have, I know there's a wide diversity of folks on the call today, but we do, for those folks who are at OHSU, we do have a number of resources available to help you navigate and vet ideas and think about the market. So we have access to several competitive intelligence databases, and there are folks that can help facilitate that. We also have a number of resources and programs at Oregon Clinical and Translational Research Institute, including the program that Melissa leads, which is the BIP core. So that's something to look into. I saw we had some folks from our technology transfer office on the line here. They are, including Michelle Gunnis, thanks for joining, Michelle, who are great resources for talking to your early stage ideas about and making sure you do have the right protections in place before you move forward with your ideas. And also we have our collaborations and entrepreneurship office at OHSU, which has incredible resources to support commercializing ideas, and also has an alliance manager that's dedicated to working with startup companies, Lisa Lukesco. So there are a lot of resources that are available at OHSU. I also provide resources for surgeons. So if you're in the Department of Surgery, I can help you with vetting your early stage ideas. So there's a lot of resources available that are there to be taken advantage of. So I encourage everyone to do that and to do things like Google. We will send out a list of all of the resources that have been shared today to everyone here. Please do not hesitate to reach out to Melissa or myself with any questions that you have. I want to just give a huge thanks to our amazing panelists today. It's been so much fun to hear from all of you and to hear about your experience. It kind of makes you want to go out and start a startup company. I'm feeling fired up. I think I'm going to go do that this weekend. Now, it's really been incredible to hear you guys have. I couldn't think of a better set of panelists to kind of share expertise on this. So thank you so much for your time, for joining us today. And I also wanted to mention one last thing, and I'm just going to share my screen really fast. Let me do that. So can anyone actually see my screen? No. Yes?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. I don't need to see this piece here. So I wanted to mention that for those folks who are feeling fired up and like they want to hang out with a bunch of other innovation enthusiasts for a weekend, starting to kind of brainstorm and build solutions to unmet clinical needs, we do have an opportunity coming up in October, the weekend of October 23 through 25. This is an event that's bringing together a number of different departments from across OHSU, including Oak Street, including Department of Surgery, including many others, as well as a bunch of industry partners, as well as our partners at MIT Hacking Medicine. So this is going to be a big health hackathon weekend, and you will have the opportunity, if you attend this, to benefit from mentorship from folks like the folks on this panel. And we're really, really excited to bring people together who are clinicians, engineers, designers, developers with a broad range of expertise to kind of form teams and start to brainstorm and build solutions to unmet needs. And we will be giving away up to $40,000 in prizes. You might even come away with some money to get your idea going. So just want to throw that out there. That's an opportunity. If you're interested in learning more, you can go to inventathon.org, and you can also learn more and submit an application. So either as a mentor or as a participant. So thank you again to everyone here. Thank you to Melissa, who co-leads this program. And we're just, thank you, everyone. I want to give a, most people are on mute, but thank you guys for.
Thank you guys. Thank you for the great
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye.